All right, let's jump right into a deep dive on palms. We're exploring this awesome report called Non-Wood Forest Products, Tropical Palms. And when you picture palm trees, you probably think of like a beach with those classic coconut palms. Well, get ready to see palms in a whole new light.
Yeah, this deep dive goes way beyond those picture-perfect beaches, right? We're going to uncover the sheer diversity of this plant family. I mean, did you know there are palms that grow underground? Or that they thrive in deserts just as much as they do on those tropical islands?
Okay, underground palms. You got to tell me more about that. But first, maybe let's start with the basics, right? Like this report mentions over 2,500 different palm species. That's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is. It really is. But the report helps break it down, like how they grow. Some palms branch out above ground. The doom palm is a great example of that. Then you got others that cluster together almost like giant shrubs.
Like the sealing wax palm, right? I've seen pictures of those. Pretty cool looking.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's the classic single trunk palms, right? The ones we all picture like the carnival wax
The
palm.
ones that scream tropical paradise.
Exactly. But then you have the truly mind-blowing ones like the nipa palm.
Okay, you have to spill the beans on this underground palm. How does that even work?
So get this. The trunk of the nipa palm actually grows horizontally, but it's beneath the soil. So you only see the leaves and those flower stalks poking up above ground. It's wild.
That's incredible. So you've got branching, clustering, solitary, and now subterranean palms. Who knew there was so much variety? And what about those iconic palm leaves, right? Are they all basically the same?
Not really. The most common type you see is called pinnate,
Hmm.
where those leaflets branch out on either side, kind of like a feather. You see that in coconut and date palms.
Ah, yeah, the classic palm frond look.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then you've also got bipinnate leaves, which are way rarer. They almost look like a fishtail because the leaflets are divided twice. And then there's the entire leaf, which is just simple and undivided.
Wow, so even the leaves have their own unique characteristics. And speaking of unique, what about palm fruits? I mean, everyone knows coconuts, but this report showed a whole bunch of different kinds.
Yeah, it's really cool to see the range.
Hmm.
You've got these massive fruits like the ones from the corypha palm. Then you've got these tiny ones almost like berries from the calamus palm. And then you have those segmented fruits from the nipa palm. It just shows the diversity within this one family of plants.
Yeah, it's clear that palms are way more diverse than most people realize, but this report also mentions something called false palms. What's that all about?
Ah, yeah. The plant world is full of these little tricksters, right?
Yeah.
False palms are plants that look a lot like palms, but they're actually not part of the palm family at all. The sago palm is a perfect example of that.
So there's a plant out there pretending to be a palm.
Well, it's a little more complicated than that. There are actually two plants that share the name sago palm, which is where all the confusion comes from. You've got the true palm, Metroxylon sago, and then you've got a cycad called Cycas revoluta. And they both produce this edible starch, which is also called sago. So that's where the shared name comes from.
So they look alike, they have a similar use, but they're from completely different branches of the plant family tree.
Exactly. It's like nature decided to play a little joke on us.
Hmm.
And the report even mentions a few more of these false palm imposters, the traveler's palm, the palma lily, and the screw palm. Cool plants, but not actually members of the palm club.
I like that, the palm club. But you know what really struck me in this report was how crucial palms are to human cultures, especially in the tropics.
Yeah, absolutely. This report actually compares the palm family to grasses and legumes in terms of how vital they were to pre-industrial societies, for food and building materials.
I can picture like ancient civilizations using palm leaves for thatch or weaving baskets, maybe even using coconut shells as tools.
Spot on. And the report goes into a lot more detail about these specific uses. Tapping palms for beverages, extracting oils for cosmetics, even using them for animal feed. It's really quite remarkable.
All right, you've got me hooked. Let's start with palm wine. What can you tell me about this ancient drink?
Palm wine is a perfect example of how humans have learned to, really harness the resources of palms. It's made by tapping the sap from a bunch of different palm species.
And remind me again, which part of the palm are they tapping for the sap?
It's the inflorescence, the flowering part of the palm.
Ah, right, not the trunk itself.
Exactly. The sap they use for palm wine comes from those developing flowers.
Interesting. So how do they actually tap the palm to get the sap?
It involves making incisions or actually cutting the inflorescence and then collecting the sap that flows out.
So kind of like how maple syrup is made, tapping those trees for their sap.
You got it. And just like with maple syrup, the quality and quantity of the sap depends on the palm species, the time of year, and the tapping techniques.
So it's not as simple as just sticking a tap into any old palm tree. There's a real art to it.
Absolutely. And this knowledge is usually passed down over generations, so it's not just a source of food, it's a whole cultural tradition.
Palm wine, a drink with a story. And speaking of stories, this report has some really fascinating case studies that show just how deeply intertwined palm trees are with different cultures.
Yeah, these case studies really highlight that human side of palm utilization. They're not just plants. They're part of the fabric of many societies.
Okay, I'm ready to hear about these cultural connections. Which case study should we start with?
Let's begin with the Iban people of Sarawak, Malaysia. They have an incredibly diverse relationship with palms. They use over 47 different species.
47 different species. Wow, I bet they rely on them for all sorts of things.
You bet. And out of those 47 species, 31 are rattans. You know, those climbing palms. They use them for everything from baskets and chairs to building materials.
Rattans are like a cornerstone of their culture, then. What about the other case studies? What do they tell us about the human-palm connection?
Well, the Kwanyama people of Namibia offer an interesting contrast. They only have 2 native palm species.
2 species. That's amazing. I bet they've developed some very specialized uses for them.
Exactly. They really make the most of what they have, relying heavily on the African ivory nut palm and the Senegal date palm. Those 2 species are woven into their daily lives, providing food, materials, even a sense of cultural identity.
It's incredible how, even with limited palm diversity, these plants can play such a vital role.
It really shows the adaptability of both humans and palms, doesn't it? And for our last case study, let's go to a small Pacific island and meet the Trukees people.
Okay, I'm picturing a classic tropical island paradise with swaying coconut trees.
Not far off. But their palm diversity is limited too. They mainly rely on just 3 species: the Caroline ivory nut palm, the coconut palm, and you guessed it, the nipa palm.
The one that grows underground. Amazing.
Exactly. It makes sense though, right? Island life requires a lot of resourcefulness,
Yeah.
and the Trukees have figured out how to make the most of these 3 palms, using them for pretty much everything they need.
I'm already feeling a sense of awe for these deep connections between palms and people.
It's an incredible story, and it spans continents and cultures. Speaking of connections, have you ever thought about how a wild palm actually becomes a cultivated crop? That's another thing this report talks about, the whole process of palm domestication.
Now that's a topic I'm definitely curious about. Let's unravel that story next. So we know that palms are incredibly diverse, right? And that they've played a vital role in human societies for centuries. But how did some of them go from being like wild plants in the forest to cultivated crops? Like, what's the story behind palm domestication?
It's fascinating, you know. It's not like someone woke up one day and said, "Hey, let's domesticate this palm." It was a gradual thing. Humans and plants adapting to each other over a long, long time.
So it all started with just using wild palms.
Exactly, yeah. People found a use for a particular palm, you know, whether it was for food or shelter or materials. And as they started using that palm more and more, they started paying closer attention to it.
Makes sense. You start to notice like which palms produce the best fruit or which ones have the strongest leaves for thatching.
Exactly. And that observation, that's what led to this shift from just taking what nature provided to actually managing those palms. Maybe they protected certain palms from being cut down, or they figured out how to harvest them without harming the plant.
So it's like a transition from wild harvesting to actually cultivating them.
Exactly. And as people got better at managing these palms, they started bringing them into cultivation, planting them closer to their homes and villages.
Ah, so that's when it becomes a true crop.
Exactly. Once you have a palm in cultivation, people can start selecting for specific traits: larger fruits, faster growth, even qualities of the sap or the oil.
So it's like humans became plant breeders, shaping the palm to better suit their needs.
Precisely, yeah. And over generations, this selective breeding, it can lead to cultivated palms that are really different from their wild ancestors, both in how they look and in their genes.
It's amazing to think that we've had such a big impact on the evolution of these plants.
Yeah, it really shows the power of that relationship between people and plants, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the report highlights 5 palm species that are considered fully domesticated. Each one's a major player in the global economy now.
Okay, I'm ready for the palm all-star lineup. Which ones made the cut?
All right, we're talking about the betel nut palm, the coconut palm, the date palm, the African oil palm, and the pejibe, also known as the peach palm.
Wow, that's a pretty impressive group. And I'm guessing each one has its own unique domestication story.
Absolutely. Take the coconut palm, for instance.
Mm.
The report suggests it probably originated In Malaysia, that region between Southeast Asia and Australasia.
So not those tropical islands in the Caribbean where I usually picture them.
Nope, those Caribbean coconuts, they're transplants. But the cool thing about coconuts is they can float, and they can stay viable for months. So they were probably dispersed by both humans and ocean currents.
Makes sense, yeah. Those tough husks are like little natural life rafts. But what made people want to domesticate the coconut palm in the first place? Was it the coconut meat?
While the meat is definitely a big part of it, it seems the main reason was actually the size of the nut. Bigger nuts, more endosperm. That's the white fleshy part we call coconut meat.
So it's all about maximizing the yield. And speaking of yields, the date palm, that's another classic domesticated palm, right? Where did that one originate?
The date palm probably got its start in Mesopotamia, in what's now modern-day Iraq.
Wow, so we're talking ancient history here.
Exactly. Date palm domestication goes back thousands of years, probably driven by the desire for those sweet, nutritious fruits.
I can picture those ancient date groves, a true oasis in the desert. But did people only domesticate them for the fruit, or were there other uses that played a role?
Great question. And that brings us back to that whole idea of multi-purpose palms, which this report really emphasizes. While dates were the primary driver, the date palm's incredibly versatile.
Right, we talked about that earlier. It's like the palm multi-tool.
Exactly. Besides the fruit, the leaves are great for thatching. You can use the fibers for ropes and mats, the wood for construction. Even the sap can be tapped for a sweet drink. It really is a remarkable plant.
It's like a one-stop shop for desert survival. And this whole concept of multi-purpose palms, that's really intriguing. It seems like a much more sustainable and holistic way to approach cultivation.
Totally agree. There's a growing awareness that we need to look beyond just the most commercially valuable product, and think about all the different benefits a palm can offer.
So are there any modern trends that reflect this shift towards a more multi-purpose approach?
Absolutely. A perfect example is what's called the whole fruit approach to coconut processing.
Whole fruit approach, that's interesting. What exactly is that?
Well, traditionally, coconut processing has been almost entirely focused on getting the oil out of the dried coconut meat, what we call copra.
Right. Coconut oil is a major global commodity, but I'm guessing the whole fruit approach is about going beyond just the oil.
You got it. It's about maximizing the value of the whole plant and minimizing waste by using everything.
So what else can you do with the coconut besides make oil?
The husk, that fibrous outer layer, can be used to make rope, mats, even potting mix. You can use the shell for fuel, charcoal, or even craft it into bowls and utensils.
And I'm guessing coconut water, that's a big part of it too, right?
Absolutely. Coconut water is a refreshing and nutritious drink. And of course, the coconut meat itself, you can eat it fresh, dry it, or process it into a bunch of different products.
It really is a zero waste approach. Are there other examples of this multi-purpose trend in action?
Yeah, the report also mentions efforts to utilize the byproducts from oil palm processing.
Interesting. Oil palm plantations have gotten some bad press, but it sounds like there's a push to make the industry more sustainable.
Exactly. Traditionally, oil palm cultivation has been all about getting the oil from the fruit, but now people are recognizing that you can use the leaves, the stems, even the shells.
So what are some of the potential uses for these oil palm byproducts?
The leaves and stems, you can use them for animal feed, compost, or even as biomass for energy. And the shells are super hard and durable. You can process them into activated charcoal. It's a valuable product with a lot of applications.
So the oil palm industry is looking for ways to become more sustainable. And speaking of sustainability, I think it's time we talk about rattans, those climbing palms we've mentioned a few times now.
Rattans are fascinating, aren't they? They're these climbing palms with some of the most valuable non-wood forest products in the world. Those canes, essentially the stems of these climbing palms, are incredibly strong, flexible, and durable. People have been using them for centuries in everything from furniture and baskets to building materials and crafts.
I can see why rattan furniture is so popular. It's strong, it's lightweight, it looks really cool. What makes rattan so valuable compared to other materials?
Well, rattan canes are incredibly strong for their weight. And they're also flexible, so you can bend them and shape them into all sorts of designs. Plus, they're naturally resistant to pests and decay, so they last a long time.
Sounds like the perfect material for a lot of applications. But I imagine studying rattans can be tricky, given how they grow and the sheer number of species there are.
Yeah, the report talks about that. Studying rattans can be challenging because there's not a ton of data on them, and the naming conventions can be really confusing. It's tough to figure out exactly which species is being used for what product and where they're coming from.
So it's a bit of a botanical mystery trying to figure out the whole rattan trade and make sure it's sustainable.
Yeah, kind of. And then you've got the whole issue of palm heart harvesting, which can be really harmful to certain rattan species.
Palm heart? I know that's a delicacy, but I didn't realize it came from rattans.
Well, palm heart can come from a variety of palms, but some rattans are particularly prized for their tender hearts.
But you said this can be destructive. Why is that?
To harvest the heart, you basically have to cut down the whole palm. And if it's a single-stemmed rattan, that means killing the plant.
I see the problem. So unsustainable harvesting could wipe out entire population.
Exactly. The report even gives an example from Thailand. There's a company there that's canning and exporting a product called rattan shoot, but it's actually palm heart.
So they're marketing it as a rattan product, but it's palm heart. What's the issue there?
The worry is that the palm heart they're using might be from a rattan species that we don't know much about. We don't know how valuable its cane is or if it's threatened.
So they could be harvesting a species that's endangered or one that could be a really important source of rattan canes in the future.
Exactly. It shows how important transparency is in the palm heart trade and why we need more research to make sure harvesting is sustainable and doesn't harm these valuable resources.
It reminds us that even our choices as consumers can have a big impact, right? On the environment and the people who rely on these resources.
Yeah. Definitely. That's why it's so crucial to be informed about where our products come from and to support companies that are doing things the right way.
Well said. You know, this report has a ton of info on specific palm uses, from food and drinks to materials and medicine.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to see how people around the world have figured out how to use every part of the palm.
I'm ready to dive into those specific uses. Where should we start?
Let's go back to one of the oldest and most widespread uses, tapping palms for beverages. We're talking about palm wine.
Palm wine. We touched on it earlier, but I'm ready for a deeper dive.
Palm wine has a long and fascinating history in many cultures, especially in Asia and Africa. It's made by tapping the sap from a bunch of different palm species, usually from the inflorescence. That's the flowering part of the plant.
So they're not tapping the trunk of the tree.
Not for palm wine. The sap they use for that comes from the developing flowers. There are all sorts of techniques for tapping, but a lot of them involve making incisions or even cutting the inflorescence and collecting the sap that flows out.
Sounds a bit like how they make maple syrup.
Exactly. And like maple syrup, the quality and quantity of that sap depend on things like the palm species, the time of year, and how you tap it.
So it's not just as simple as sticking a tap in any old palm tree. There's a real skill to it.
Absolutely. And that knowledge is often passed down through generations, so it becomes more than just a drink. It's a tradition.
Palm wine, a drink with a history. What are some of the palms that they tap for this drink?
In Asia, some of the most commonly tapped palms include the coconut palm, the palmyra palm, the wild date palm, and the nipa palm.
A pretty diverse group there. What about in Africa?
Africa has its own unique palm wine traditions. Some of the popular species there are the African oil palm, the doom palms, the raffia palms, and the Senegal date palm.
It's interesting that palm wine tapping seems to be concentrated in Asia and Africa.
You're right. The report does mention that it used to be a thing in Latin America too, but it's not as common there now.
So it's a really global tradition with roots in all sorts of cultures. And I bet it's more than just a beverage in a lot of places, right? Like it probably has some cultural and social significance too.
Yeah, absolutely. In lots of cultures, palm wine is used in ceremonies and rituals, celebrations. It's something people share with friends and family, and it helps to strengthen those social bonds.
So it's not just about the drink itself, it's about the traditions and the connections that surround it. It's a great example of how palms are woven into the fabric of society.
Exactly. And speaking of woven into the fabric, we can't forget about palm thatch, another super important use of palms, especially in tropical regions.
Palm thatch, yeah. We mentioned it before, but I'd love to hear more about it. What makes it such a good material for roofing, especially in those hot, humid climates?
Well, palm thatch has been used for roofing for centuries, for a reason. It's lightweight, it's durable, and it's surprisingly waterproof, especially if it's installed correctly. And because it's natural, it's biodegradable and it just blends right into the environment.
I bet a well-made thatched roof can last a really long time, too.
It can, yeah. A well-constructed one can last for years. It provides shade, it provides shelter, and it's linked to those traditional building practices.
It's amazing how something as simple as palm leaves can be turned into something so beautiful and functional.
It is, isn't it? It shows how ingenious people are all over the world, figuring out how to use what nature provides to create these sustainable and harmonious spaces.
Speaking of nature's gifts, I know that palms are also valuable sources of oils, fibers, and building materials too, right?
Yeah, palms are so versatile. They offer a ton of resources that have been used for centuries.
Let's start with palm oils. We all know about coconut oil and palm oil, but I'm curious about other types of palm oils and how they're used.
There are actually a surprising number of palms that produce oils,
Mm.
and each one has its own unique properties and uses.
Okay, I'm ready to expand my palm oil knowledge. What are some of the lesser known palm oils out there?
One interesting one is the oil from the babasu palm. It's really similar to coconut oil and can be used for food, cosmetics, even biofuels.
Sounds like a very versatile oil. What about other types?
Another intriguing one is the oil from the African oil palm. While it's already a major source of vegetable oil, people are starting to get interested in using different fractions of the oil for specific purposes.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more about these different oil fractions.
So palm oil is made up of different fatty acids. And by separating these fractions, you can create oils that have very specific properties. Some are great for cooking, others are better for cosmetics or industrial uses.
So it's all about refining the oil to make it work for a specific purpose.
Exactly. And this kind of fractionation, it means we can use palm oil in a wider variety of ways and potentially in a more sustainable way too.
Okay, so lots of potential there with palm oils. What about fibers? I know palms are used for everything from rope to baskets, so I'm guessing there are quite a few different types of fibers out there.
Absolutely. Palms are fantastic sources of natural fibers, and each one has its own unique characteristics.
Let's hear it. What are some of the most common palm fibers?
One that immediately comes to mind is coir, the fiber from the husk of the coconut.
Ah, core. I've seen it used in doormats, ropes, even gardening stuff.
Yeah, it's a strong, durable fiber that's resistant to water and rot, super versatile and used for everything from household goods to building materials.
It's amazing how something that used to be considered waste is now such a valuable resource.
It just goes to show how our understanding and use of palm products are always changing. What about other types of palm fibers?
Okay, so core. What else is there?
Another one worth mentioning is a raffia fiber.
Uh-huh.
It comes from the raffia palm, which is mainly found in Africa.
Raffia fiber. I've seen that used in crafts and weaving. What's special about it?
Raffia is known for its strength, its flexibility, and its natural luster. It's often used in basketry, weaving, and those iconic raffia hats.
Ugh, those big floppy hats. Perfect for a sunny day. So it sounds like raffia fiber is more about looks and crafts than those heavy-duty uses like core.
You're right. Raffia is often prized for its beauty and how versatile it is for crafts, but it's also really strong and durable, making it suitable for a bunch of different uses.
So core, raffia fiber. Any other common palm fibers we should know about?
One more I'd mention is piaçava fiber. It comes from a few different palm species, including the piaçava palm of Brazil and the African piaçava palm.
Piaçava fiber. Okay. I'm not as familiar with that one. What do people use it for?
Piaçava fiber is known for being stiff and really resistant to abrasion, which makes it perfect for things like brushes, brooms, and even ropes.
Sounds like the ideal material for those heavy-duty cleaning tools.
Exactly. And it's a sustainable and eco-friendly alternative to synthetic fibers, so that's a big plus.
Okay, so palm fibers are clearly super diverse and useful. This report also highlighted the value of palms as building materials, right?
You're right. Beyond thatch, palms provide all sorts of materials that can be used for building.
Let's hear it. What parts of the palm are used in construction?
Well, the trunks of many palms are surprisingly strong, which makes them good for beams, posts, even flooring.
Really? I always thought of palm trunks as being kind of hollow or flimsy.
Some palm species do have hollow trunks, but a lot of them have dense, woody trunks that are just as strong as traditional timber.
Fascinating. So they can actually be used to build pretty sturdy structures.
Absolutely. And because palms grow relatively quickly, they can be a really sustainable source of building materials, especially in the tropics, where they grow so well.
That's a good reminder that we should be thinking outside the box when it comes to building materials.
I agree. And besides the trunks, you can use the leaves and stems for building too. You can weave them into mats and panels for walls and ceilings, or use them as insulation under roofing.
So palms can provide pretty much a whole building kit.
Exactly. And it all comes back to that idea of multi-purpose palms, those species that give us a whole range of benefits and help us utilize natural resources more sustainably.
Well said. I know this report also touched on the medicinal properties of certain palms too, right?
Yes, it did. Traditional medicine systems all over the world have long recognized the healing properties of certain palms.
Okay, I'm interested to hear more. What are some examples of palms that are used in traditional medicine?
One that comes to mind is the saw palmetto, a small palm that's native to the southeastern U.S.
Saw palmetto, I think I've heard of that. Isn't it used to treat prostate problems?
You got it. Native Americans have used extracts from saw palmetto berries for centuries to treat urinary tract problems and prostate enlargement.
And has modern science backed up any of those traditional uses?
It has, actually. There's growing evidence that saw palmetto extracts can help manage the symptoms of benign prostatic hyperplasia, or BPH.
So traditional knowledge and modern science are coming together. It's really cool.
It is, and the saw palmetto is just one example. The report also mentions other palm species that are used to treat all kinds of things, from skin conditions to digestive problems.
So there's a whole pharmacy waiting to be discovered in the world of palms, and this report even went a step further and listed 18 palms that have the potential to be developed into even more valuable resources in the future.
That's right. The report features a list of 18 palms with amazing potential, showcasing species from all over the globe that could be sources of food, materials, medicines, you name it.
Wow, 18 palms with untapped potential. I'm ready to learn about these promising palms of the future. Where should we start?
Let's start with one that I'm particularly fond of, the babasu palm. It's native to South America, mainly found in Brazil.
Babasu palm. Okay, what's so special about this palm?
It's incredibly versatile, with a whole bunch of uses. The oil from its seeds is similar to coconut oil, so you can use it in food, cosmetics, and even biofuels.
Seems like a real all-rounder. What about other uses?
The leaves can be used for thatch, the stems for building, and the shells for fuel or charcoal. Every part of this palm can be used.
I remember the report mentioned something about its potential for agroforestry, right?
That's right. The babasu palm is perfect for agroforestry systems. That means you can grow it alongside other crops, and it provides all sorts of benefits: shade, soil improvement, even extra income for farmers.
Everyone wins. The palm thrives, and the farmers benefit from it. What other promising palms are on the list from South America?
Another great one is the Maurice palm. It grows in the swampy areas of South America.
A swamp palm. Definitely not your average beach coconut tree.
You got that right. The Maurice palm actually thrives in flooded areas, and it's super important to the indigenous communities that live in those regions.
So how do they use this swamp palm?
The fruit is a staple food for them. It's full of vitamins and antioxidants. They eat it fresh, they process it into a pulp, or they ferment it into a drink.
Sounds delicious. What about other uses?
Oh, they use the leaves for thatch, the fibers for weaving, the trunks for construction. It really is a multi-purpose species.
Amazing how this palm has adapted to such a unique environment and become so essential. Are there any other South American palms with potential that we should talk about?
The report also highlights the carnoba palm, which is another one from Brazil.
Carnoba palm. I feel like I've heard of that one. Isn't it known for producing some special kind of wax?
You're right on the money. Carnauba wax is a highly prized natural wax. It's really hard and has a high melting point.
So what's it used for?
Oh, it's used in all sorts of things, from car waxes and polishes to cosmetics and even food coatings. It's a natural alternative to those synthetic waxes, and it's biodegradable and non-toxic.
It's like a wonder product.
Yeah.
And what about the palm itself? Is it useful for anything besides the wax?
The leaves are good for thatching, the trunks for timber, and the fruits can be used for animal feed. It's another one of those versatile palms with a lot to offer.
I'm seeing a real trend here with these South American palms. They're all so multifaceted with a huge range of uses.
You're right. And this isn't just a South American thing. The report also features several promising palms from Asia and Africa, too.
Okay, I'm ready to expand our palm horizons. What about some of the Asian palms that stood out to you?
One that's particularly interesting is the Palmyra palm. It's a majestic palm that's native to South and Southeast Asia.
The Palmyra palm. I think I've heard of that one. Isn't it considered sacred in some cultures?
That's right. It's a really important tree in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. But beyond its symbolism, it's also a super valuable multi-purpose species.
So how is the Palmyra palm used?
The leaves are great for thatching, they're used for writing material, and they can even be woven into mats and baskets.
Wait, writing material. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so in South and Southeast Asia, Palmyra palm leaves were historically used as a surface for writing. They'd treat the leaves and cut them into strips, then bind them together to make books or manuscripts.
Wow, it's fascinating to think about these ancient manuscripts made from palm leaves.
And that's not all. Besides the leaves, the Palmyra palm has a ton of other uses. The fruit is edible, the sap can be tapped for a sweet drink or fermented into alcohol, and the wood is strong and durable, perfect for construction.
It's amazing how one palm can provide so much. Any other Asian palms on this list that we should mention?
Definitely. Another noteworthy one is the sugar palm, which is also native to South and Southeast Asia.
The sugar palm. I bet I can guess what it's known for.
I think you can. The sugar palm is a big source of palm sugar, a natural sweetener that's becoming a popular alternative to refined sugar.
I've actually seen palm sugar at the store. It's cool to know where it comes from.
And besides the sugar, you can also get fiber, thatch, and even timber from the sugar palm. It's been used in Southeast Asia for a long time.
These Asian palms are truly remarkable. What about Africa? Any promising palms from there on this list?
One that's particularly interesting is the African fan palm. It's a really stately palm that grows across a lot of sub-Saharan Africa.
I've seen pictures of those. They have those big fan-shaped leaves, right?
That's the one. They're really striking, and they're super useful to the communities that live among them.
How do people use the African fan palm?
They use the leaves for thatch, making baskets and mats, and even fiber for rope and twine.
Sounds pretty similar to the palmyra palm in terms of leaf uses.
Yeah, you're right. There are some similarities there. And just like the palmyra, the African fan palm also has edible fruits and a sap that can be used for drinks or fermented into alcohol.
It seems like palms play similar roles in meeting human needs, even across different continents.
Absolutely. And the report points out that the African fan palm could be really good for sustainable development because it's drought tolerant and can handle tough environments.
It's a real survivor.
Speaking of survivors, we can't forget the African oil palm. It's already a big source of vegetable oil, but the report says it has even more potential, especially when you look at its byproducts.
Right, like we talked about before, using the leaves, stems, and shells for things like animal feed, compost, and activated charcoal.
Exactly. And researchers are working on even more innovative ways to use these byproducts, making the whole industry more sustainable and getting the most out of this valuable palm.
It's great to see how our understanding of palm use is always evolving. This report, with its focus on those 18 palms with so much potential, it really gives me hope for the future.
Me too. This deep dive has been amazing. It just shows how diverse and useful and culturally significant palms are.
We've really gone deep on palm trees, haven't we? From those weird underground ones to the ones that have been cultivated for, thousands of years. And palm wine, thatch, oils, fibers, it's mind-blowing how much they offer.
It really is. And it goes beyond just the practical stuff, right? Palms have this deep cultural and even spiritual significance for so many people. They're so intertwined with life in many parts of the world.
Definitely. But before we wrap things up, I want to hear more about those 18 palms that the report highlighted. The ones with all that development potential. It's like a sneak peek into the future of how we might use palms.
I'm happy to talk about those. It's really exciting research, It shows that we're still learning about the potential of these plants.
So which of those promising palms really stood out to you?
Well, we already talked about a couple of them, the Bagasu palm and the Maurice palm from South America. Both of them have huge potential, especially if we think about agroforestry, where you can grow them along with other crops.
Like building a whole ecosystem of abundance with palms right at the center.
Exactly. And it wasn't just those South American palms. The report also highlighted some really promising Asian palms, like the nipa palm, the one that grows underground.
Oh, yeah, the palm with a secret life. What makes it so promising?
Well, besides its unique growth habit, the nipa palm produces a sap that's loaded with sugar. It actually has one of the highest sugar yields of any plant.
Wow, that's incredible. So could it be a good source of sugar in the future?
It definitely has potential. Researchers are looking at ways to harvest and process that sap to make sugar, biofuels, even alcohol.
So a palm that seems a little weird at first could actually help us solve some problems. What other Asian palms are on this list of promising species?
Another one is the fishtail palm, sometimes called the Karyota palm. It's from Southeast Asia, and it has these leaves that literally look like fishtails.
I've seen those. They're pretty cool looking. What's so promising about the fishtail palm?
Well, it's another multi-purpose species. You can use it for thatch, timber, starch, even sugar production. But here's the interesting part. It produces a starch that's similar to sago starch.
And sago starch is? Remind me.
It's extracted from the sago palm. But harvesting sago palms can be pretty destructive because you often have to cut down the whole tree. The fishtail palm could be a more sustainable way to get this starch.
So it's all about finding those alternatives, right? Making sure we're using resources in a way that doesn't harm the environment. Any other Asian palms we should know about?
The report also mentions the Palmyra palm as having a lot of potential, especially because it can handle drought conditions and grow in places where other plants struggle.
Ah, the Palmyra palm, the one that's sacred in some cultures. It's amazing how something can be both spiritually important and practically valuable.
It really shows how complex our relationship with palms is. And speaking of connections, there are some African palms with a lot of potential too.
Okay, let's talk about Africa. Which palms from that continent are ones to watch?
One is the doom palm. It's sometimes called the gingerbread tree because the fruit kind of tastes like gingerbread.
Gingerbread tree. Now that's a palm I can get behind. What makes it so promising?
It's really tough.
Eh,
Can handle drought and even fire. And it's a true multi-purpose species. You can eat the fruit, use the leaves for thatch and weaving, roast the seeds to make something like coffee, even make a sweet drink from the husk of the fruit.
It's like a desert survival kit in a palm tree. What other African palms have potential?
The African oil palm is another one. We already talked about how it's a big source of oil, but this report says we could be using it for so much more, especially if we look at the byproducts.
Right, like using the leaves, stems, and shells for animal feed, compost, and activated charcoal.
Exactly. And research is happening all the time to find even more uses for those byproducts, making the whole industry more sustainable and getting the most out of this incredible plant.
It's amazing how our understanding of palms keeps evolving. And this report, with all this talk of potential, it makes me feel optimistic about the future. There's so much left to learn about
I
palms.
agree. This deep dive has been incredible. It shows how diverse and useful and culturally important palms are. It's a story that's taken us across the globe, exploring ancient traditions and looking ahead to the future.
Well said. And to everyone listening, keep exploring the world of palms. Maybe you'll try a new palm product, learn about how palms are used in different cultures, or even plant a palm tree in your own backyard. It's a whole world of wonder out there. Until next time, happy deep diving.